What's up, YouTube? I've had a lot of questions and requests to do videos on setting up bait casters for casting. And there's three types of cast control systems on reels, and they all differ depending on the manufacturer. But the basic one is like this reel right here, where you've got centrifugal brakes, which are these little plastic pieces in there, and you can pop those in or out, turn them on or off, and they run on a brake drum, which is this little thin piece of metal here. And depending on how many of those brakes you pop out, you'll either have more or less resistance when you cast. The second type is like this reel, where you've got four brakes that, just like the other one, and they run on a drum, which is that one. And you set those brakes for your course adjustment, and then on the outside you've got this dial, which is a magnetic control for real fine adjustments. And that's what the little round pieces of metal are there that you see. And the last one is like this, which is a straight magnetic backlash control. No centrifugal brakes. And you've got a dial that you set from 0 to whatever it is. Different reels have different numbers, but 0 being the least amount of resistance, and then the highest number would be the most. And I would highly recommend anybody that's new to bait casters, I would highly recommend going with a Daiwa, because there's no centrifugal brakes to mess with. And no, I'm not sponsored by Daiwa or anybody else, but these are the easiest to deal with and set up for casting. The problem you run into with brakes, with centrifugal brakes, is that after a few fishing trips, this drum will get dry. And when it gets dry, you've got to put a little bit of oil on it. Or if you don't, you'll start hearing these brakes. When they start getting dry, you'll start hearing them make noise. And you'll also start losing distance, casting distance. The other issue with centrifugal brakes is once you oil the drum and put it back together, the reel is going to be real loose. And then as you sling some of that oil out of there, then it'll settle into a point where it's pretty much the same. And then eventually you'll start losing distance, and you'll start hearing that noise again, and it'll be time to oil that drum again. That's one of the main things I really like about Daiwas, is there is no brakes. And once you set a Daiwa to whatever number you set it on here, every cast is identical. The resistance is identical. There's never any variation. The only variation you might get, which is highly unlikely, is if the bearings, the spool bearings, get dry. But you don't even have to oil those very often. You know, maybe depending on how much you fish, but it's not a frequent thing that you have to put any oil on those bearings. Now, when it comes to setting up a bait caster, I do it a little different than most people, and the reason for that is I'm looking for all the distance I can get out of these things. And so the way I set up one, and I'm used to bait casters, I've been throwing them my whole life. But almost every video you see, they'll tell you to set some brakes and then put a lure on your pole and start adjusting this spool tension knob until when you kick it into free spool and you let that lure drop to the ground, then you don't get any overrun here because you've got tension on this. And while that'll keep you from backlashing, it also kill your distance. What I do is I take one out of the box. Let me back this off. See all that slop in there? I start tweaking it down, I tweak it down till I've got just a tiny bit of movement, side to side movement in that spool. And that's going to get you all the distance you can get out of one. If you're new to bait casters, like this one, I would do that. That'd be my first move. And once I do this, I never touch that reel again. That's where it stays all the time. And I'll run on a 4-brake reel, I'll run 2 brakes normally. If, like I said, if you're new to it, I would set the spool like I'm talking about, and then I would pop all 4 brakes out, and I would start casting, and then I'd go to 1 less brake and 1 less brake until I got to a point where I could control it, but I'm getting all the distance I can get out of it. And like with the Daiwa, all of them are like this. I would set that spool like I'm talking about. You can see right there just a tiny bit of side-to-side movement. And then I would crank this mag force all the way to the highest number. And then I would I'd cast and I'd go back 1, cast and go back 1. And keep dialing it back until you find the sweet spot for you to the point where you can cast without backlashing, but you're getting all the distance you can get out of one. The only other person I've ever seen that, and I'm sure there's more, but the only video I've ever seen of a person that sets them up like I do is Matt Allen of Tactical Bassin. And he sets it up exactly like I do, with just that ever so tiny amount of side-to-side motion in the spool, and then working with the braking system. I think he called it running a loose reel, which is what I like. I like to get all the distance I can get out of a bait caster, because the more distance, the further you can cast and still control, the better odds you have of getting bit. Because the more water you cover, the longer your bait stays in the strike zone, the more chances you have of getting bit. And I've fished with a lot of guys that use that other method, and you don't get that much distance out of it. I actually run into a subscriber not long ago that had a brand new reel, and he had just come from fishing when I run into him, and he asked me about why he couldn't get any distance. He said, I got the brakes cut all the way back, and he said, I still can't get any distance with this reel. And I picked the reel up, and the first thing I did was check this spool. And there was no movement, and it was tight. So I showed him what I did about backing it off until you just had that tiniest bit of side-to-side movement. And then I popped on a couple of brakes for him, and I told him to try it like that. And he contacted me later on YouTube and said that that made all the difference in the world. He was getting plenty of distance now, and didn't have any more issues. Anyway, that's the skinny on how I do it. I'm sure everybody's got their own way of doing it, and like I said, I do it because I want to get all the distance I can get out of a cast. And if you've got that spool tension knob tightened down to the point where there's no slack in this spool, you're not going to backlash, but you're not going to get a lot of distance either. So anyway, hey, thank y'all for watching, and let's get on to it.